Welcome to the Dr. Berkson's Best Health radio show. Boy, this is the time to really try and figure out how to protect your best health so we don't succumb to the chaos. I'm still here in Florida, not in my regular recording studio, so it's a little bit hot here, so I've got my Florida clothing on. But over this Thanksgiving time, been pondering a lot how to stay positive, not just smart. How to stay wise, not just science-based. How to stay content, not wanting what might be, but having acceptance with what is. So I thought I would open up with a poem, and then I would intermingle that with some science, as I am wont to do. And this poem came upon my desk by Mary Ann Perrone. So I'd like you to just close your eyes for a moment, unless you're driving, and take this in. I found this to be very helpful this year. I am no longer waiting for a special occasion. I burn the best candles on ordinary days. I am no longer waiting for the house to be clean. I fill it with people who understand that even dust is sacred. I am no longer waiting for everyone to understand me. It's just not their task. I am no longer waiting for the perfect children. My children have their own names that burn as brightly as any star. I'm no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. It already did, and I survived. I am no longer waiting for the time to be right. The time is always now. I am no longer waiting for the mate who will complete me. I am grateful to be so warmly, tenderly held by even just the universe. I am no longer waiting for a quiet moment. My heart can be stilled whenever it is called. I am no longer waiting for the world to be at peace. I unclench my grasp and breathe peace in and out. I'm no longer waiting to be recognized. I know that I dance in a holy circle. I'm no longer waiting for forgiveness. I believe. That meant a lot to me. I am no longer waiting for everyone to understand me. It's just not their task. I'm no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. It already did, and I survived. These are good, soothing, healing, calming, realistic words. This is not fake news. This was not a fake poem. So I hope you enjoyed that, or perhaps you just turned off your sound because that didn't speak to you, but I hope it did speak to you. Well, I've done a bunch of shows on hormones and their protective role or not, depending on whether they were female hormones or male hormones. And a study just came out of the University of Illinois at Chicago being my hometown. And this is a very interesting article. The reason this study happened was a number of very observant scientists noted that pregnant women die of COVID much less often than non-pregnant women. And they noted that women who were doing fine, even if they tested positive during pregnancy for COVID, after pregnancy, if they still had COVID, could end up in the ICU doing much worse. They said, what the heck is going on here? Well, it turns out that estrogen and progesterone and its major metabolically active metabolite allopregnenolone are pregnancy hormones. They're female hormones, but they're very, very elevated during pregnancy. In fact, a woman's hormone levels are as high as they'll ever be during pregnancy. So if a woman got COVID during her pregnancy, these pregnancy hormones were extremely protective. And right after the baby is born, all of these hormones that are maintaining the progestation, the wonder of life, to support progestation, the birth miracle, all these hormones were elevated incredibly so that the baby was sustained. Right after the baby comes out, these hormones drop the levels drop in the mom. So if she still tested positive for COVID, she had a higher tendency to end up having it go more severe, ending up being in the ICU and having a very tenuous outcome. So this paper was birthed out of those very intelligent observations. I'm sure we're observing, I mentioned this in my article on COVID that I wrote at the end of March and published mid-April, and it is available for free at drlindseyberkson.com in my blog section, and has now been translated into Spanish and French, used in some French hospitals, and was published in the Townsend, I believe, June issue. So I was commenting how we didn't know what a pregnant woman getting COVID, how she might transmit that to her child. We still don't know a lot about that, but we're learning about the mom and her hormones. Now, we have known that COVID-19 symptoms, severity, mortality are more frequent in men than in women and in older people. And in older people, older women tend to have less female hormones unless they're on hormone replacement therapy. So these scientists published a paper in Trends in Endocrinology and Metabolism just this last week. And they said what we have seen is that female reproductive steroids, the most female hormones, which are estrogen, progesterone, and then when progesterone is metabolized, it's physiologically active, most active metabolite, allopregnenolone, which when you take progesterone orally, you make a lot of your progesterone into that biologically active metabolite, are more anti-inflammatory. They reshape the competence of immune cells. That's why younger women with more hormones tend to be healthier than older women with less hormones, or males with less of the female hormones. Female hormones, remember, estrogen's been on the planet longer than any other hormone. Hormones, at least sex steroid hormones, mostly speak to a receptor, although they can be transmembrane in other forms, but they mostly speak to receptors. And estrogen has more receptors, so she has more languaging and signaling in the body than any other hormone. So estrogens and progesterone and its metabolite, allopregnenolone, reshape the competence of the immune cells to work just a itty bitty bit better. That adds up during COVID. These female sex hormones also stimulate positive antibody production so that your body can mount a response, a positive response to COVID. And they also promote respiratory epithelial cell repair. And that is why women get pneumonia on the whole less when they're younger, because they have more estrogen, because the hormones work on the lung cells. I remember I had a patient once that had recurrent lung disease, and she was always ending up in the hospital. And I told her that she is a great candidate for hormones. She might not completely get over her pulmonary disease, but it would help her live through it and meet the challenge much better. And her doctor, her endocrinologist, looked at my recommendations and said, "I'm surprised if you're on progesterone, you haven't died yet." And her husband called me up crying because the doctor had no idea what he was talking about. He was thinking it was synthetic progestins, and he had no understanding that natural, our own body's hormones, help repair lung lining cells, epithelium of the lung cells. So estrogen, progesterone, and its major metabolite, allopregnenolone, promote respiratory epithelial cell repair, which you want if you get a respiratory virus like COVID. But the big, cool thing that estrogen, progesterone, and its metabolite, allopregnenolone, do is they inhibit the ACE receptor, where the S protein of the SARS-2 virus clicks in like a Lego, and then, unless enough is going on to protect yourself, you are more at the mercy of that virus. So these female sex hormones block that lock and key entry, the door of access for the novel coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2, to infect the organism. And this is really interesting news. So if you're considering bioidentical hormone replacement in the pandemic, this is a good time to consider it. And if you are males, you want to keep your hormones balanced. You don't want to be taking excess testosterone and androgens, and you want to be as balanced as possible because balanced hormones affect your immune system more positively, not just the female sex hormones. But they became interested in this whole deal when they noticed that COVID positive pregnant women who had no COVID symptoms at all, but they were testing positive, right after the baby was born, their symptoms could escalate to require intensive care right after the birth. Why? Because all those hormones plummet as soon as the baby is born. So the hormones that sustain the pregnancy, like progesterone, are 100 times more concentrated in the pregnancy's third trimester, and then they plummet, go down right after the baby is born. Pregnant women are 15 times less likely to die from COVID than other women, but as soon as the baby is born, this becomes an issue. So this is really pretty interesting. We now know that hormones are anti-aging, anti-inflammatory, that really aging is the loss of hormones and the upregulation of inflammation. That's kind of a recipe. How do you get older? You have less hormones and more inflammation going across time. That's why hormones are anti-aging. You know, we're learning so many things to do that keep us younger longer. Probably in another 50 to 70 years, there are going to be humans, if they could afford it and they know what to do and they've got the functional docs or experts to guide them, we're going to start living to be way over 100 years old. I know Dave Asprey in his book Superhuman says to be 185, and I'm not so sure that that's so far off given so many things we're learning. Like we're learning that this one protein, cestrin, helps boost healthy stem cells of various organs and is anti-inflammatory, and it boosts telomere length, and it's really a protein that is so linked to living longer better. So once we find out what boosts those proteins and things like hormones that protect our brain and our immune system and tamp down inflammation, we're going to know how to be better. You know, if you are on Match.com or whatever, Tinder, whatever dating app you're on, and if you have an older age, men don't want anything to do with you because they think of older age as sagging skin and you can't talk fastly and you really aren't, you know, energetic in the sack. But soon, in a few decades, it isn't going to matter your chronological age because you're going to be able to look and act and be all the ways that you were when you were younger if you know the tools to do. And hormones are some of the most powerful anti-aging tools that we have. And we're seeing with COVID what hormones do to protect the body. And for males, I do believe that if they have more balanced androgen male hormones to female hormones and lots of other nuances, not just the testosterone. That's not the only hormone men have. They probably fare a lot better with hormones too. But if their hormones are out of balance, they might be a more vulnerable victim to COVID. I mean, that's really incredible. That came out, the article's called Sex and COVID-19, A Protective Role for Reproductive Steroids, and it came out in Trends in Endocrinology and Metabolism 2020. I mean, this is the time to be on hormone replacement. Now, I believe bioidentical hormone replacement is better, but I do believe that even a synthetic hormone is better than no hormone at all. And COVID is emphasizing and underlining that, making font-sized letter much larger. Well, you know, I was talking to my old college roommate this morning, Amy, and she was saying that a number of our colleagues were saying that they don't believe in masks and that they won't go to restaurants and make you wear masks. I'm down here in Florida where a lot of people don't believe in masks in Florida. And when you're out on the boat, there's lots and lots of Trump flags flying behind the boats, even though things have changed in the electoral vote, etc. So this article came out of the American Institute of Physics and was published just 5 days ago, November 24th. And it's very, very pertinent for those of you. And I'm going to summarize it. I don't want to belabor it because I've already done shows on masks. But it's all about how face masks slowed the spread of COVID-19. And they basically were able to show with physics that if 70% of Americans could start using masks, any kind of masks, so I'm not going to go into depth because they go into droplet size, micron droplet size compared to a hair piece of hair droplet size. If 70% of us could start wearing masks, we would be able to shut down this pandemic in a much faster, more effective manner. Now, N95 masks certainly do it the best, but they were able to say that the results suggest the consistent use of efficient face masks, such as surgical masks, you can just buy a package of the paper surgical masks, could lead to the eradication of the pandemic if at least 70% of residents use such masks in public consistently. Even less efficient cloth masks could also slow the spread, and this is the caveat, if worn consistently. So I have not been going to the gym in Austin because when I drive by the gym, Lifetime Fitness, there's several hundred cars in the parking lot. There's a lot of young people. They might not even know they're spreaders, even though they're wearing masks. But here in Florida, there's just a small little tiny gym. Most of the time I go in there very early in the morning and there's no one else in there. But when they start coming in, nobody else is wearing a mask, even though COVID is starting to hit a number of the residents in this beautiful, beautiful place. I'm on a pond with palm trees everywhere called Tarpon Cove. But take that in. You know, if you're a mask denier, you're contributing to the length of the pandemic. This came out in Physics of Fluids, 2020, November 24th, so it's just a few days ago, and it's called The Perspective of Fluid Flow Behavior of Respiratory Droplets and Aerosols through the Face Masks in Context of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID. So let me just say that one more time. A bunch of scientists got together and were trying to see the efficacy of masks and what it might do for us to save the economy and save our people and have less Americans that we love tragically die. And their summary was the results suggest the consistent use of efficient face masks such as surgical masks, just plain old surgical masks that you can buy anywhere, even though N95 are the best, just plain old surgical masks, could lead to the eradication of the pandemic if at least 70%, a little over 2/3 of the residents use such masks in public consistently. And even if you don't have access to that, you see some guys just have a scarf over their face, even less efficient cloth masks could also slow the spread. And this is the caveat, if worn consistently. So please, 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 I don't understand. There was a very famous gynecologist who has millions of followers. I remember several decades ago, this person had lots of best-selling books out, and they have gone to the far side. They've dropped off the edge of reality. And just yesterday, they published what they said was a Johns Hopkins paper that came out saying that there really aren't any increased incidence of deaths from COVID. It's all a complete hoax. And she claimed this was from a Johns Hopkins group of research scientists and that it had been taken down on the internet. And so she had found another copy and was putting it up for everyone to read and recommended that we all send it out to everyone we care and love about so we could calm everybody down. So I looked to see who this person was that wrote this article that goes against all the science that I've been reading. Turns out this wasn't from the Johns Hopkins Institute at all. That was totally fallacious. And that this person had had a podcast radio show and had become collaborative with a media company that went and bought 117 radio shows, and they were all very far right, disseminating all kinds of disinformation against the pandemic and politically. And I went and read some of the papers that this author had written, and I was stunned because so much of it went against the science that I get up every morning and read for 2 hours. And I then put up on Facebook, be careful. Just don't listen to me. You don't have to believe everything that I say at all. Find out who the person is that's written this article. Where do they come from? What else have they written? What do they say in other articles? Who are they aligned with? That's what you want to do, is you want to go back through the thread to find out the veracity and honesty and clarity and scientific connection that this writing really has. That's what you do. So when I went back and connected the dots backward, this was not a Johns Hopkins scientist at all. And here this person is passing this misinformation, fake news forward that won't get the 70% of people wanting to consistently wear masks because they don't even think that there's accurately an increased risk, because an article from Johns Hopkins said there was, when there was no article from Johns Hopkins that said there was just this fake news. So be very careful not to be a victim of fake news. I mean, isn't that what Knowledge is Power is all about? To try and be less of a victim as much as you can. And it really reminds me how difficult it is to really know what the truth honestly is, which is one of the reasons I have this show, to try and help people on their own become more agile thinkers. Don't let somebody else, even myself, just tell you what to think. Take a deep dive. Learn how to take a deep dive. Learn how to use PubMed. Learn how to track connecting the dots backwards. That's where you get your own sensibilities. You know, that movie Sense and Sensibilities, you develop your own sense and sensibilities about right and wrong for your world life opinion. There's so many people, we're so polarized. So where is the truth and what is accurate? And that's what we need to hone, our accuracy skills. We need to hone our own accuracy skills for our own health, for our loved ones, and for ourselves. This is just so critically important. We were just watching the Netflix movie, The King, and we were trying to see if this was accurate, but Henry V was duped into thinking that the French king was trying to assassinate him. So we went to war against France, and 7,000 Frenchmen were killed. I think that's the number, while several hundred Englishmen were killed, and supposedly it was just from fake news. I couldn't substantiate if that was accurate, but that got us all into a conversation. There's always been fake news. There's always been, how do you know that's really true, and who do you really follow, and what do you really do to help yourself out the best? This isn't an easy task to do, to accomplish, to live. That's why there's all these podcasts and all these shows and scientific papers. People are trying to get a handle on veracity. But if you look back at how often we've been wrong, how can you trust anybody except yourself or a few people you think are honestly telling you like it is? I remember I went to a lecture by a psychiatrist that was done with medicine and now had become a spiritual leader. And he was saying that the hardest thing for humanity is to know who's telling the truth. That we're wired in such a way that we're easily duped. We're easily part of the herd of sheep. That's why I try and have some fun and some connection and some community and share information that you feel bolsters up your capacity to live better and connect the dots backward to that which is more accurate, so that you can find out what's best for you. Because most of the time when you listen to other people, even if the opinions are expensive, they're not necessarily best for you. I remember I did a poem and a blog on opinions, and I'm going to just really shorten it here, but I had these favorite shoes from Italy. I loved them, and was wearing them. I walked off a plane and just the soles just fell off the bottom. And I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and went to a shoemaker there, and he said, "Oh no, you're never going to be able to fix this. You have to throw them away." But they were these gorgeous leather shoes. So went back to Austin and went to another cobbler, shoe cobbler is the old name. He said the same thing. I went to one more and he said the same thing. And I was lamenting this to a friend who said, I've got this shoe person that I've always used for a really long time. Why don't you go to him? So I took these black leather cool shoes that I'd bought in my 20s from Italy that I still would love to wear if there were soles on them. And I brought them into him. He took one look and he said, "No problem. I can fix them." And for like under $25, he just fixed those soles. And what it was is no one else knew how to do it. So the people are going to tell you it's not possible or it's wrong if they don't know how to do it. And pretty much people are down on what they're not up on. And that is just how it is. Which leads me to this amazing, amazing article that came out in Medscape November 23rd. Today is the 29th, so it was just a few days ago, by a writer who is also an emergency room physician. And it was published in Medscape. And I just needed to share this. I'm going to read this so that you get to benefit from this, because I imagine not all of you have subscriptions to Medscape, which is an online medical journal that goes out to now about 6 million practitioners around the world. What caught my eye was the title of this, called Ignoring the Sins of Our Patients, making a play, of course, on ignoring the sins of our fathers. Ignoring the Sins of Our Patients by Amy Faith Ho, an emergency room physician, as well as a really incredible, heartfelt writer. This is from Dr. Ho. I've saved the lives of masked gunmen, gang lords, and Klansmen. I've treated serial killers, pedophiles, and terrorists of our collective society. I've dressed the wounds of a rapist and walked not 10 feet away to stitch the torn pelvic flesh of his child victim. The moral whiplash is enough to make anyone's conscience spin. As an emergency medicine doctor, I'm obliged to treat everyone who walks, staggers, or wheels through our double doors, regardless of what walk of life they've detoured from, what sins they've committed, and what beliefs they hold. I will remember that I remain a member of society with special obligations to all of my fellow human beings. This passage from the Hippocratic Oath, recited by every newly inaugurated doctor, is noble in its essence, but boy, can it become quite complicated in practice. Think about yourself as you're hearing this. Think about all of us as you're hearing this. These commitments are intrinsic to our jobs, part of the oath we swear to do no harm, no matter how much harm the patient has inflicted. This was already our reality as doctors, but COVID layered a new burden on it. As the infection spread of a deadly virus has engrossed our everyday minds, society has become more distanced and isolated. Our friends and families have become potential infective agents, and in many cases, compassion has been superseded by survival instincts. Where neighbors would normally reach out a helping hand, they now ask, where are the gloves? But while most people have pushed away from one another, we in healthcare have pulled together, converting our medical system into a COVID fighting machine. Even for us, though, the risks of COVID have raised the price of compassion. Spending extra time at the bedside with a COVID patient brings with it an increased risk of contracting the same illness. The risk now not only affects our lives, but potentially those of our loved ones. When we swore to do no harm, we didn't necessarily commit to putting ourselves in harm's way. In the early months of COVID, we all weighed the uncomfortable possibility of sacrificing our own lives to treat a stranger fighting for theirs, and this became even more chilling as we witnessed our colleagues succumb to this very reality and see doctor after doctor and nurse after nurse die. Extraordinarily, these facts did not discourage the vast majority of us from showing up to work day after day, night after night, shift after shift. These workplace hazards we now implicitly accepted as part of our allegiance to the mission of medicine. However, this personal risk does not muddle the pre-existing moral quandary of treating all fellow human beings, especially when it comes to those cast out from society, as prisoners. Prisoners have been disproportionately infected with COVID, with higher rates of transmission as well as higher fatality rates. The reasons for these are multiple, including crowding in penitentiaries, underlying health conditions of the incarcerated, and even prisoners intentionally infecting one another to escape the prison walls. Nonetheless, we treat these patients often in our hospitals, affording them the same therapies as everyone else. Here we are saving the lives of felons, some already sitting on death row. The virus tried to complete the death sentence that the law had prescribed but had not yet executed, but still we intervene aggressively with medicines, procedures, and ventilators, all at great infection risk to ourselves. In an era where healthcare rationing is becoming closer to reality, why should we risk our lives, the lives of our coworkers, the lives of our families, and the resources of our hospitals for these patients? I asked myself the same question as I treated countless patients with COVID, performing high-risk aerosolizing procedures like intubations, all the while praying that my N95 mask carried the same protection over numerous reuses. As I peered over these prisoners' sacred faces, I was struck by their vulnerability as they struggled to breathe, tears collected in their eyes, millimeters from the tear-shaped tattoos that celebrated the deaths they inflicted in their former lives. In that moment, teetering in the crossroads of life and death, they were devoid of the brutal callousness of their crimes. Instead, I saw only honest authenticity as they grasped between breaths. Help me, please. Let's not waste this opportunity of COVID to come out the other end a more angry, more easily triggered, nastier person. Look what doctors and nurses and healthcare frontline people do. They struggle to survive, even those with COVID that are on death row, putting themselves and their families at risk. This is a stressful bitch of a time, but why not use it as everything that shows up in our lives as on a plate in front of us to be used as curriculum, to come out better, to connect better, to make the world better rather than worse, because all the world is being shaken up. I remember, I've come from lots of diagnoses. I've had cancer multiple times. I'm missing almost 8 organs. I've been told by many doctors that at various times in my life there was nothing left to do for me. And when you get a diagnosis like of kidney cancer, and you've never been a smoker and you're not obese, it is like running into a brick wall. And all of you, all your cells just act like they're bombed. And they just explode wide open. It's so terrifying. It's so scary to be on survival. But what I have come to learn from multiple acts of trauma and diagnoses putting me on survival is that it's also an opportunity when all of my molecules have exploded to let them settle on into a shape that I have more control over molding, because of all our lives are some clay, metaphorically speaking. So the world is being bombed to a degree. Now Taiwan has 23 million people and only had 7 deaths from COVID. And Vietnam has only so many million people and have much less, like 23 deaths from COVID. So not everybody presently is being bombed, but we are. And lots of people are. Let's see when all of those molecules come floating back down, what you can do to make yourself a better person and this world a better place. If you like my Smart Plus Heart message, don't forget to go to drlindseyberkson.com/membership, because I'm trying to hang out more and more with peeps so that we can learn together, be better together, and enjoy the journey. Blessings, everybody. What a heck of a ride. But let's try and come out in a much, much, much better place. If you've got any ideas that you think would help for us to do that, I'd love to hear it at info@drlindseyberkson.com. Bye-bye.